Alright, so welcome back to another review. Now I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't planning on picking up a pair of the new Arya Stealth. I just thought, 1 Arya, 2 Arya, 3 Arya, whatever, right? However, DMS's glowing review really piqued my interest, particularly where he mentioned that the new Stealth revision helps smoothen the infamous silvery timbre found in most HiFiMAN headphones.
But find me one headphone that is as balanced as this is in every single category.
I figured, oh man, if these fix that issue, these will definitely climb the ranks on my list to be a top 5. Hands down. So now that I've got them in for review, what do they actually sound like? Let's not waste any time. Let's jump in. Now, before we begin, don't forget the usual. Subscribe if you like audio games and memes. Hope this one helps you out. Let's jump right in. So we're going to start off with the contents. Now, I'd like to mention right from the start, I've got my hands on these from HiFiMAN's website, Open Box Deal. They promise to deliver a product that sounds like a brand new headphone and functions like one too. Only some minor cosmetic defects may be present. Plus, they include the 1-year warranty just like with a brand new pair, so I figured I may as well save a couple $100. Anyways, nothing's changed from the previous iterations. You get the headphone, the box, a short dual 3.5mm to 1/4 inch cable, the owner's manual, the 1-year warranty, and the customary snack for your kids. So now let's jump into the build quality. Well, it's a HiFiMAN, so build quality is going to be a bit questionable at worst, moderately decent at best. The majority of the headphone is made of plastic. Not necessarily cheap feeling, but it's not some super strong like Sennheiser plastic either. The only metal parts are in the upper part of the headband, the grills, and well, the drivers, of course. The suspension strap is, well, it's okay. It's okay. Gets the job done. Now here is a bit of disappointment. Listen to this. It's not absolutely terrible, but I really don't think a $1,600 headphone should be like making those sounds when moving around. Again, like it's not a sign of a bad build. It's just not premium. I wouldn't call this feeling premium at all. And now let's get to a more upbeat portion of the review. Comfort. Well, there's a reason I've had a love-hate relationship with the Aryas ever since I came across the first iteration. While the sound signature hasn't been quite to my liking, these remain one of the most comfortable and agreeable headphones I've ever tried. So here's the thing. Suspension strap designs will always be more comfortable than their counterparts. We know this. Next, these headphones are moderately heavy and, well, they're quite large. But do you know why you don't feel it as much? That's what she said. Because they compensate with a strong clamp force to prevent them from slipping off of your head. Even though that may sound painful, it's really not. HiFiMAN added some extremely thick but stiff pads to help relieve the pressure. It's honestly one of the best combinations ever, really. I can mostly wear these around the house and move around without much slippage, and it's almost as good as the Sundara's portability. Now let's get to some amplification. Dr. Wowie.
When we find that media, we'll find Dr. Wowie.
On my THX AAA 789, through single-ended, I ran them at around 1030 on gain 2. Through balanced, I ran them at around 10 on gain 1. And now on the iFi signature, and yes, that is coming, I ran them at around 1030 with gain set to normal. So now let's approach the sound portion of the review. So, the following tests will be performed using single-ended without the use of any EQ. We will discuss the use of the iFi signature amp and XLR differences in the notes and observations portion of this review. Now with that out of the way, let's commence.
Bass.
Surprisingly neutral. It's definitely solid and still packs that planar punch, but it's not as forward and aggressive as you'd expect. Still quite fast, snappy, and detailed though. So I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed. Control, yet power. It's a great combo. Bass extension is still great, though I can't shake the feeling that at the lowest extremities, it sounds a bit rolled off, and I mean the slightest amount. Not that it doesn't reach low enough, it does, but you can hear it's not quite linear like you would expect from a planar driver. Now mid-bass presentation is very clean, and while I do like it because I'm just a leanish mid-bass kind of guy, I feel a few people may disagree and think it's just not quite warm enough. So here's a catch though. You may have heard about the Arya's legendary bass that is almost in like bass head territory, but not quite there yet. At the very least, in single-ended with the stock cable and absolutely no EQ applied, these do not have that type of bass. You've been warned. Again, there's still plenty of bass to be heard here, believe me, there's plenty. It's not quite as much as we've come to expect from the Aryas, both the V1 and the V2. But more on that in the V2 versus V3 comparison. And yes, it's coming. Now let's get into a more uplifting topic regarding the sound. Mids. That's right, mids. Oh yes, the mids are finally here. They're here. These definitely bring the mids closer than previous iterations of the Aryas. Now, don't get me wrong, they're still not gonna be mid-centric cans, but they definitely filled the scoop in the mids created by the previous iteration's V-shaped sound signature. Classic example, right off the bat, Dream On, Postmodern Jukebox cover, you know the one. You've been here a long time, I hope. If not, welcome to the channel, hey! So the female vocals aren't exactly miles ahead, like in a mid-centric can, like the 600s, but they're at least a half step forward, where they're still on the same level as the instruments, but ever so slightly more important than them, and I'm just talking the slightest amount. The cello solo, very detailed and accurate, definitely impressed in that regard. Pizzicato sounded very fine and tangible, however, it falls a little, and I mean a little short in the timbre department. It's just not quite as warm and natural sounding as other headphones I've heard, particularly dynamic drivers. Again, not a dynamic driver, but need to let you know. Though I suppose you can come to expect that thinner timbre characteristic from a HiFiMAN by now. So overall, I don't really think the mids lack any detail or presence. And again, they're not as neutral as a neutral headphone, but there's far less disparity between the highest ends and the lowest ends as opposed to a more traditional V-shaped headphone. Oh yeah, it's all coming together. Wait, I think I've used that one already. Anyways, you can really tell that HiFiMAN is working on their timbre and treble control. So here's the thing, I'd still consider these to be elevated, but they're definitely more controlled and in line with the other portions of the frequency response. So don't get me wrong, they still possess a bit of that crystalline metallic timbre I've mentioned on various HiFiMAN headphones that just ruined the experience for me personally. But this time, the decrease in treble response compensates for that a little better and results in a bright and fun, sparkly sound that doesn't take it that far. Now, truth be told, I've only encountered issues with the most treble forward of tracks like Bangarang by Skrillex and Syra, and maybe with tracks like Spaceman by Hardwell and Carry On by Avenged Sevenfold. Even then though, the list of treble-related grievances, it's been reduced a bit in this case. So that's putting these in the worst light possible, right? Now let's discuss the pros. Like I said, the timbre of the treble as a whole is on the brighter side of things. What that does is highlight things like upper percussive instruments, sounds like the whooshes in electronic tracks, and the infamous coin rubbing sound in Thunder Horse by Deathclock. Again, you can pretty much hear and feel that effect near the back of your throat throughout the entire track, and I just pointed at the back of my throat like you could see the back of my throat. Assume there's a back of the throat behind this camera. Assume my second chin is touching the camera. Anyway, just take a listen to Thunder Horse, pretty much any part of the track, if you own these, or the HiFiMAN Sundaras, and you'll know what I'm talking about. That probably didn't sound positive, but I promise you, it's done in a pleasing type of way, not in an annoyingly forward manner. Now, sibilance isn't totally out of control either. While it's not the most laid-back consonant range I've heard, I can definitely listen to it without feeling like it hurts or interrupts the experience. And on the upside, that silvery high end is just, it is tasty. Another quick example, Kyoto by Skrillex and Syra. The treble here is definitely above neutral and has those silvery characteristics to it, but it tastes so good. Soundstage and Imaging. I really wouldn't describe these as wide, but they're definitely not narrow either. They're still tall sounding and encompassing, just not as wide as the Arya's reputations come to be known. I like a wide soundstage, but having a narrower soundstage isn't really a deal breaker for me. So, I give these a pass. Now, imaging is where it gets a little interesting here. It's still superb, as usual. However, rather than having a, circular or square-ish Soundstage Imaging Arya. Like most headphones, these have a somewhat triangle-ish shape. Almost, yeah, I guess almost like listening to speakers, where the speakers are over there, there's this wide area all the way back here, and then as the sounds get closer to you, it's like a V. It travels this way. And I should mention, in my experience, most tracks tend to place those sounds towards the center or rear of that space, just by coincidence, which is what probably leads to them sounding a bit less wide. Now let's get to the notes and observations portion, and this one's a little lengthy because there's plenty to discuss here in terms of alternatives, for better or worse. So let's begin with the cable itself. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your preferences, the cable you choose to use with these does affect the sound signature. So like I mentioned, this evaluation was performed using this cable, the short stock 4th inch cable. But let's discuss what happens when I change it up a bit. If I use the aftermarket Neo Musica cable that I got with my Arya V2s, it hides vocals just a bit. It pushes them back, but it makes the soundstage a little bit wider. While bass remains unaffected, the fact that mids were pushed back a bit lets the bass stand out a little more. Now here's a bit of good news. The treble does smoothen out a teensy bit, but of course, there's a trade-off. Slightly smoother treble, slightly less forwardness in certain instruments on the high end, particularly where the coin rubbing effect in Thunder Horse comes into play. So again, pros, cons, subjective. Now, if I run them with my custom XLR cable, it really doesn't mess with proportions per se, the signature itself, but it does make the entire sound as a whole a little more intense. So it just grabs the entire thing the way it is and just a little bit, part of that also sounds like it's trying to push the soundstage a teensy bit further in the process. I'll be honest, I prefer the softer approach of the stock cable, really. And now let's discuss this bad boy, the iFi signature. So I previously mentioned that it pairs with the Arya V2s extremely well because it makes the bass come alive in tracks that benefit from the extra enjoyment. With the V3, it still is, but not for the reason you think. First of all, I gotta start out positive and say that the signature does a phenomenal job at smoothing out the treble on the Aryas. Like, it really just, it's so compatible, it works so well. It turns the headphone into something not entirely, but very, very different. Enough to make you go from saying, I hate the Aryas, to I like the Aryas. It's that noticeable of a difference. Really, like, it cleans up the treble so well. Though, when it comes to the X bass, unfortunately, toggling it on is just overkill. It's just too much bass, and mostly the mid bass. It's probably just about how the Arya V3 are tuned and with the whole, roll-off thing we discussed, but yeah, that's gonna be a no-go. So let's conclude here. Well, in the end, we've got another Arya. It's got great detail, fantastic comfort and portability, within the house of course, be reasonable, and great imaging. This one is probably best suited for people who enjoy an extra amount of sizzle and spice up top. Those looking for a somewhat treble-heavy can that still has plenty of bass and mids presence. And if you've got an iFi signature, even better. You'll experience even better treble reproduction on these. It's just too bad the stock sound changes without the stock cable. I really would like these more if they sounded the same with an aftermarket cable, whether that be in 4th inch or XLR, whatever, man. I can adjust. But this, not the worst cable I've encountered, but I'd rather not use this cable, really. So do I recommend these more than the V2s? Well, I guess you'll have to find out in the next episode. Yeah, so that's going to do it for me today. Hopefully this helped you out. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode. Okay, ciao.